All right.
All right.
Jason,
I apologize for the pause.
And you are
now
on. Our session
is being recorded.
All right. Well, thank you all. As Jen said in the introduction, I'm here to sort of talk a little bit about the NSF-funded Engagement and Performance Operations Center. You can call it EPOC, you can call it EPIC. We'll respond to either. It was a challenge in getting that acronym in place, as many people can attest whenever you're trying to get a new project in place. And this is aimed to be a project between Indiana University and ESnet. It's awarded out of the CC STAR program, which many of you have received funding from. And it is $3.5 million for 3 years. And our aim here is to establish partnerships with regional networks, including yourselves, infrastructure partners, science communities, and some others to try to fix some of the vexing problems that we see in our community today. And much like we experienced this morning, where technology was sort of having us all at its mercy, we're here to work with the scientific communities directly and try to help them remove some of the technology barriers that they may be running into. I think that this should be no surprise to anybody, is that today's science is really all collaborative. And by collaborative, we mean we're dealing with multiple partners, we're dealing with multiple data sets, many different points of interconnection between these different pieces, cross-agency cooperation, and all of this complexity really just exacerbates a lot of the problems that we've seen on a local scale and are now really starting to become global problems, whether it be with data movement or access to technology or lack of understanding about how people can really utilize it to their full advantage. With better access to data, we're able to ask harder questions and do more science. So that's really what we're aiming to do to improve the overall process. At the root of this, it's end-to-end performance. It's something that we've been crowing about in this community for 20 years, maybe longer, as being the most vexing thing that we're trying to deal with. And this is a product of our environment. We have lots of independently managed moving pieces, whether it be hosts or applications or networks that interconnect them, and nobody controls everything. And whenever something goes wrong, whenever an end user reports that there's a problem, this is a challenge because we don't know where the problem may exist on a multi-domain path. We don't know what layer of the OSI stack it may be dealing with. And we don't really know who to ask to try to go out and fix that. So what we are trying to do here is to at least smooth out some of this friction and make it easier for people to try to fix these issues when they come out. So just as a real brief example, we can take a look at a problem that we solved not too long ago between trying to transmit some data from a location in Thailand to a location in the United States at IU. And just trying to get this, seemingly simple operation of data transfer between two locations accomplished, you can see that we're dealing with many different moving pieces from an administrative domain perspective. In this case, we had to traverse 7 different networks. And if there's a problem, if there is some issue that is propagating up to the user and they're reporting it, how do you start to debug this path? How do you figure out what to do? Who do you go and talk to try to get this? So we've tried to create this system so that we can leverage the relationships that we've built throughout the community to isolate where the problem may exist and try to fix it a little bit faster. And to do this, you need partnerships. Partnerships are needed to really scale this engagement effort. And as I noted in the beginning, we're focusing on 4 major groups. The regional networking partners, which are those that provide connectivity to the universities. We're looking at infrastructure partners, people who provide a facility or some other functionality that a lot of researchers are using. And we're looking at science community partners, significant groups of application and domain specialists that are present and able to address the science issues that people are trying to work on. And this support does span federal bodies. The color of your money shouldn't matter if you're having a problem to try to get a solution in place. So we currently work with Department of Energy and NSF because those are the ones who fund us. But this doesn't stop at their doorsteps. We typically will work with the Department of Commerce to help NOAA. We will work with NIST. We will work with Department of Defense. Pretty much anybody who reports a problem, we're there to help them solve that. And the other underlying idea that we want to try to get across here is that whenever something is solved and we have a lesson learned or some form of documentation that's created at the end of it, we want that knowledge and those lessons to be shared. So those are always published and put in a prominent location so that people can find them later. So this is the initial set of networking partners. And we do want to note that as we talk about the network partners and the infrastructure partners and the science communities, we're always using the word initial because this is really the starting point. It's not the destination. Any network that wants to assist with or wants to hear more about EPOC in the future, please, we're willing to talk to you about this. We just needed to pick a starting point, and these were the 6 that we started with. These include iLight, Ornet, Kimber, GPN, Learn, and Front Range. And others have already approached us and said that they're interested, and we think that's great. So if anybody out there hasn't talked to us yet and is interested in this, just shoot me a note or shoot Jen a note. We'll have our email address at the end, and we're happy to talk to you about being involved. With regards to the infrastructure partners, it's a couple of large organizations that are doing a couple of different things. We have Exceed, which is a partnership with all of the computing facilities that are funded by the NSF. We have the Campus Research Computing Consortium. We have the NSF Cybersecurity Center of Excellence. We have the Gateways Institute, Internet 2, and Quilt. Again, these are just a subsection of how we wanted to get the word out to get people interested in this project. More are certainly possible and encouraged. And then a couple of the science community partners we decided to work with initially. And what you'll notice here is that these are not necessarily large-scale science collaborations on the scale of LHC or anything of that nature. We're really trying to aim towards the medium to small collaboration space because we find that these are the groups that need the most help. These are going to be your computational chemists, your biologists, your earth systems people, weather, climate, all those different facilities and functions that don't necessarily have a constant stream of funding to upgrade their IT infrastructure or a lot of expertise in-house to deal with it. So we want to try to target the people that can benefit the most, and there is a lot of low-hanging fruit for these groups. Sort of our partner organization is the CI Engineering Coordination Group that I helped to coordinate. You know, this was originally funded as a place for CI engineers to discuss engineering topics. And a plug for this is that later today at 2 p.m. Eastern, we're starting up our series of brown bag talks once again. If anybody is interested in learning more about this or joining the mailing list, it's been converted into a Google group. So that information is available there. Like I said, this is a starting point. It's not a destination. We do anticipate bringing other people in. One of the things that we will be focusing in on with our 2nd and 3rd year projects are trying to embed the program within projects and facilities directly. Basically working with the staff that is at a facility to try to accelerate different workflows that may be available. And we're probably going to be piloting this with a couple of DOE facilities to start. So I'm going to go briefly through our 5 main focus areas, and some of these may hit a nerve with some of you. They may sound interesting. Others may not be immediately usable within your environments. Like I said, we're happy to talk to anybody that wants to hear more about these. So the first one I wanted to highlight is our Roadside Assistance, and this is the one that's currently up and running and available for use for anybody who wants to use it. And this comes from a common problem that we get reported to, whether it be on the IU side or the ESnet side or just any community mailing list, is that something's broken. File transfers were working last week and now they're not. Where's the problem? Is it my side? Is it the other side? Is it something in between? And your typical scientific user doesn't know how to really figure out what's going on. And really, it shouldn't be their job to figure out why it's broken. They should just be able to report that this is a problem and have somebody come out and fix it with them. So our roadside assistance was designed to sort of deal with this. And we use a lot of car metaphors within our group here because I think that they're very apt for what we're trying to do here. So you can think of this as a crash repair, trying to fix something that may be broken on your vehicle. Send an email to our EPOC list at IU.edu, and we're able to. Somebody is extremely loud. If you can mute, that would be very helpful. So what we try to do with this list right here is that we have a collaboration of 3 teams that are already up and ready to support this. Our engagement team at ESnet, the International Networks team at IU, and the IRNC NOC at IU. And our goal here is that and within 24 hours, you will get a response back. You're not going to get a response from an automated ticketing system like Footprints or ServiceNow. You're going to get a response from a human. That human will be your spirit guide for the remainder of the time that this problem is open. They are going to be tasked with providing updates. They are going to be the one who's going to be coordinating the fixes with others. And the reason that we did this is because we want to put a personalization on it. We don't want this just to be an automated system that spits back responses in techese that you're not really able to internalize or figure out what they mean. The case manager and the lead engineer are assigned, and there is shareable infrastructure set up. And what we mean by that is that there will be a specific and open Google file that contains all the documentation for a given problem. One of the things that will be inside of that folder is a no-nonsense write-up of what we believe the problem is and where we are in the process trying to fix it. This will be written in English. It's not going to be written in techese. So it's not going to be, MTU, blah, 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 was checked and these 3 devices were found to be suspect. No, it's going to be user-reported file transfer problem between X, Y, and Z. These are the steps that we're taking to fix. Here are the contacts that we made. The person who reports will get regular updates about the process as well. So the reason that we did this is because whenever there are many organizations that are involved in one of these fixes, everybody may be holding on to a little tiny piece of the puzzle. We wanted to try to have this folder available so that all of this can be shared in a single location. What we do is if we are involving some of our other partners in this, whether it be CARC or Exceed or the regionals, we'll pull all that together. We'll be the ones who do the contact, and we'll make sure that that ticket does not get closed until the person is satisfied with the results. Okay. What we do is we try to understand the end-to-end path from a networking perspective and try to use as many public resources as we possibly can. And then we also handle the coordination with the engineering staffs along the way. And our outcomes here are very forward-focused. We want the ticket to stay open until the reporter is satisfied. We're not really guided by the fact that we have multiple tickets open at any given point in time. That's not a metric of success. We want to make sure that they are happy, because honestly, if they're not happy, if they're not able to do their work, then that's a failure for everybody all around. After every single thing that we work on, whether it be a success or a failure or something in between, there's going to be a write-up that's posted afterwards. The reviewer has the chance to review it to make sure that it's accurate. And we're going to make sure that that lesson learned is posted in a public location, in this case, Faster Data. Sharing how the problem is solved is just as important, we believe, because we want to make sure that we don't always relive the same lessons over and over again, as we are often apt to do. A second part of this is a consulting arm, and this is usually lighter weight than a full ticket report. Same submission process, send a note to EPOC at iu.edu, but this can be used just to talk about things, whether it be I'm trying to set up a new data transfer node, I would like to know how a DMZ will impact my scientific workflow, which firewalls work well and which ones don't, all those other sort of questions that are related here. We will have a similar operations approach for this, and a couple people have already taken advantage. And then anything that is public facing, you know, we don't reveal any private information if people don't want us to, will be posted on Faster Data as well. So two really brief examples here of this process in action, just so that people can get an idea of this. This happened, I think, earlier this year, maybe late last year, where users at the Pan-STARRS telescope in Hawaii were reporting issues with trying to get data from Hawaii to the mainland. And a part of this process is understanding the scientific workflow. It's understanding that there are regular 100 TB data transfers. It's understanding the two paths, or I'm sorry, the two endpoints and the path between them, and understanding what the expectations and the realities really are. In this case, it was only about 320 megabits per second when it should have been a lot more than that. After investigation from numerous partners that we coordinated, we found a couple of things. The first thing was that Personar testing identified that it wasn't a clean 10 gig connection, so that was easily fixed when talking with people at Max and Internet 2. Personar also identified that the default route was not correct as well, so that needed to be fixed. The MTU settings were a little bit off, so those were able to get in there and be reconfigured. TCP settings on the host were misconfigured, often a very common problem. There was found to be another top-of-rack switch with a buffer bottleneck that was removed from the path, and things were redesigned on that end. And lastly, the aging software and system setup was really the root cause here. So you'll notice that at the end of the day, there were more than 5 problems that resulted in this issue, and this is quite common. We're never going to have a single issue that is impacting the scientific community. It's always layered, and the different layers really hide the fact that these issues come up. And this is why we need to have multiple people looking at the problem from all different angles to understand what the true issues really are. And these take multiple weeks, if not months, to really get to the bottom of. So at the end of the day, transmission rates went from 320 to 1 gig, which some people may think is not that great, but that's still 3 times better than it was before. And only after we get to the root cause, which was software and architectural problems, will we really get to a full 10 gig or better sort of performance, but it is better than it was when we started. And one last little quick example, this does come from the LHC community. We were dealing with a problem at the National Center for Physics in Pakistan, and they were trying to transmit things to London. So this did not touch a US network, but we still were assisting in the process here as well. Transfer rates as low as 40 megabits per second. Doing some testing, we figured out that it was capable, the site was capable of getting better transmission, but this path was particularly bad. They had reported intermittent problems over the previous 2 years as well. So all the different problems that came out of this one, and again, we're dealing with 2 slides worth of problems. Traffic shaping and misconfiguration on one side of the connection was limiting R&E traffic. That was removed near the beginning of the process, and then we found some other things after that. Top of rack switch bottleneck with small buffers was limiting performance. Intermittent packet loss within the carrier network itself. Identified by Personar, cause was unclear, but they just moved the device closer to the edge of the network, and that was able to fix that problem. Packet loss identified within the regional network, and then lastly, additional bottlenecks between the networks. In this case, 1 gigabit per second with a lot of congestion, and the only real fix here is to move to a 10 gig path. So at the end of the day here, we were able to get this one 10 times improved as well. Again, not earth-shattering, but certainly better than what the scientist originally reported. And 10 times really helps when you're trying to move large amounts of data. So that was sort of a quick overview of the Roadside Assistance, and I will reiterate that this is something that is available and live right now. People can use it whenever they really want to. The next thing, and this is something that a couple of the regional networks are taking advantage of in the next year, including Kimber, Learn, and GPN, is what we call an application deep dive. And you can think of this just like another form of car analogy, but instead of fixing a flat tire or a crash repair, This is regular maintenance. It's looking at how a system is in place and what changes need to be put into the system to make it function better in the future. This is based on work that ESnet developed over 10 years ago to talk with scientific communities and understand their scientific workflows, namely by talking with a real scientist and the real IT staff to figure out what's going on today, and then being able to characterize in terms of near-term and medium-term and long-term outcomes and goals that they wish to accomplish, and make sure that the technology and the infrastructure in place is able to deliver on that. We often get into discussions that have nothing to do with networks. We really have to dig deep into sociology to fix a lot of these problems. So we'll give a little quick taste of what this looks like. There's two primary components to this. It's a narrative that somebody is able to work on beforehand, usually as a homework item. We ask them simple questions about what the science is, how it functions, who they collaborate with, and who they coordinate with, all to sort of get at the second part, which is called the data estimation. And data estimations is exactly what it sounds like. It's looking at what the data set sizes are, how frequently they move, where they're exchanged to, so that we can gain a better network understanding of what that scientific workflow looks like. This is all based on a template that is on the ESnet website right now. We're going to be posting the EPOC version of this on the EPOC website probably in the next week or two after we get through the Kimber event. So what's inside of that template? It's things that are non-threatening when you ask somebody. You know, if you come up to a scientist and you start talking about SDN, they're going to get very frightened and not want to talk to you anymore. So we want to get away from that. We want to talk to them about what they're doing. Are they involved in a large-scale facility? Are they trying to transmit data sets to use a supercomputer or to store off-site? Who are they working with? Which people or institutions across the United States or across the world are they regularly exchanging information with? What is the nature of the instrumentation that they're using? Is it a network-attached microscope? Is it a genomics facility? Are there still hard drives being shipped through the mail? And lastly, and most importantly, is the day in the life of the science. What does the science look like when somebody is physically sitting there and trying to get some work done? And I can relay this by form of an example. We did this with the Advanced Light Source at Berkeley Lab years ago. And day in the life of a scientist there usually involves a lot of rolling around between multiple workstations at a beamline hutch. And what I mean by that is that once they sample their actual item that they're attempting to learn more about, whether it be a piece of leaf or a piece of bone or a piece of material, everything is digitized, and they need to then use software either locally on local workstations or via supercomputing systems that can spit out analysis pretty quickly to really understand if they are capturing their data correctly. Once they have a good understanding that their sample is ready to go, they can automate that entire thing, and within minutes they can have terabytes of information that need to be processed somewhere. All of this really means that they need to have sufficient networking locally and on a wide area scale. They need to have computing resources that are allocated. They have to understand how the codes need to be written. There's a lot of other ancillary steps that occur after this, but the only way to really get to the bottom of it is to talk with them. And that's why this is a social process more than anything else. After we get through the social aspects, then we can get into the technical aspects, and this is where we usually work with the local and the regional IT staff to fill in the gaps. We need to understand what software is being used, what the support model is, if there's charges that are associated with it. We need to understand the network and data architecture of the local and the regional setups. We need to understand if cloud services are something that they're considering or currently using. And then lastly, and most importantly, sort of a free-form section which tells them to talk about the issues or pain points that they may be experiencing. All of this really relies on these partnerships. But when it's done, everybody from the researcher themselves to the management of the facility to the local IT staff to the funding agency has a good understanding of what the science, data movement, drivers really look like. and what pieces and dependencies and timeframes everybody is dealing with. This can be in the form of a document, it could be in the form of a summary, whatever the case may be, it's actionable. It's something that can continue to live on and be updated if the person so chooses to do. There's also an identification of bottlenecks and pain points that can be acted on immediately. And most importantly, it's the relationships. Everybody now knows who is involved in the success of this process. They can reach out to each other and leverage those relationships into the future. And hopefully, and in most cases, they will do so. So the next piece of our focus area here is a more technology-focused piece. In fact, the next two are technology-focused. The first being network analysis via NetSage. And to sort of shift gears a little bit here, performance and measurement are both very, very important. Performance gives us a common and basic understanding of how something is doing right now. Measurement is how well it may be able to do in the future. We can use tools like Personar, and we have lots of global deployment instances that are out there to do this. But we need to have something that gives us a little bit more intelligence about what's physically going on, something that's able to look at traffic patterns and give us a up, down, yes, no about where these are flowing, perhaps why they're flowing to those locations, and if they are working as well as they possibly could be working. So there is an example that is posted right now at that website, portal.netsage.global. And there's many different dashboards that are available right there. The one you're looking at here is a simple overview of the various international links that are connected via the IRNC networking program at NSF. Just as an example of how this can be used, one morning, I believe this was last year and not this year, one of the links started getting a little bit hot, so it showed up as being red. Going in and looking at that information, you can get a baseline understanding of what's going on from a capacity perspective. You can see that, yes, we went from sub 5 gig performance to peaks of over 35. And that's easy to see just by looking at the graphs. But what does it really mean? By looking at the S-flow and the net flow information that's coming off of these devices, we can get an understanding of who the top senders and the top receivers are for this. In this case, it was identified to be a lot of sites that are affiliated with LHC, Fermilab, Janet, Brookhaven, MIT, CERN, and so on. So by understanding that there is a lot of LHC traffic flowing over these links at that given point in time, we can make the assumption that, okay, maybe they're doing work on the accelerator, or they're trying to do some form of Monte Carlo simulation, whatever the case may be. What this tries to do is focus on different use cases, and the questions that were developed initially for NetSage revolve around the functions that are available today. Within the bandwidth dashboard, for instance, how used are links and where are congestion points? Within the flow data dashboards, what are the top sites using these links and what are the top sources and destinations? And then the last piece, and I have another example of what this looks like, the data archive monitoring can be done to understand what the top source and destination pairs are on a host-by-host basis. And that includes information on how well TCP is performing. So here's an example of a data archive. In this case, this one is deployed at TAC, one of the Exceed supercomputer centers in Texas. And just by having this put on the head nodes, the nodes that are responsible for the in and the out of data transmission into this facility, we can get a good understanding of who's doing well and who's not doing so well. So in this case, by volume, we have a lot of data, almost 4 terabytes coming from Pilot Fiber Inc. In this case, that's just a local provider that's in the Southwest, I believe. We have a lot of data coming from Los Alamos. We have some coming from Texas Tech. If we look at this by rate, we're seeing, high peak performance from PSC and from Tennessee, Knoxville, and San Diego, and some others as well. So what we hope to do with information of this nature is to be able to give the operator, in this case TAC, a little bit better understanding of who are their big users and how well are they doing. If, for example, they feel that some sites should be able to move information at a faster rate, perhaps they can start a conversation with them and say, we're seeing that you're only getting about 200 megabits per second or 100 megabits per second. What tools are you using? Can we help you accelerate these data flows? So at the end of the day here, we are working with a couple of regional partners to get this in place. We've started a conversation with Front Range to have T-Stat installed at the Wyoming Supercomputer Center. We've been working with GPN to have their network instrumented. A couple others are interested as well. We would love to talk with you if you're interested in this component of it, because if you can't measure something, you can't improve it. So the next sort of technical component, and this is the one that we don't really have a whole lot of info on yet, but I still include it in here because I think it's of interest to this community, is what we've termed the services in a box. And this comes out of an observation when I was running the LAN workshops a couple years ago. By way of analogy, I had a user or an attendee of the workshop come up to me and compliment me on the material and say that this is a really great workshop. I really had a good time. I learned a lot about this. I'm never going to use any of it ever again, though. And I had to ask him why. And he said, well, you know, I am the IT guy at my campus. You know, I'm the one who has to fix the network. I'm the one who has to change the bulbs and the projectors. I'm the one who has to do the Windows updates on the laptops. I don't have time to install PerfSonar. I don't really think I have a use case for Science DMZ. I don't ever see a need to have a DTN, but it's all really great. I'm glad that you spent some time to tell me about these things. So I believe that this is something that is not just at this one single user's institution, and it probably is very present within a lot of the regional networks around the country, is that there is lots of interest in technology. People like technology. It makes them happy. But there's also the other push and pull factor here of not knowing an immediate use case, knowing that resources, time and money, most specifically, are needed to design and build and specify this infrastructure. You know, how do we defeat this? And the way that we were thinking about this is that we don't only want large facilities to be thinking that they can be a part of these national scale efforts. We don't need to only believe that the biggest of the big universities and regionals will be able to support a Science DMZ or a DTN or PerfSonar. Medium to small schools can benefit just as much, but they need to have something that's right-sized to what their needs really are. So we'd like to have a system in place to try to ameliorate the cost of the design. We'd like to have people who understand how these things work help with the implementation process and create infrastructure that can be delivered as a service. Sort of the last piece of this is that, you know, nothing like this is free. How can we develop a business model that facilitates cost recovery, but at the same time still allows people to get the most out of something like this? So our goals for this are going to be to offer a way to, for these smaller and less resource facilities to use this emerging technology. We want to try to create new paths for the regionals to interact with them and learn about these different scientific use cases, possibly by using the deep dives. And we want to try to reduce the cost for service development and operation, because at the end of the day, if this is available and it's able to help somebody, that's really what the goal should be. We want to turn the idea that, you know, I can't do that, or I won't do that, or I don't have time to do that, into this is a useful thing. And now it's accelerating our science. We're able to go after more grant money as a result of this. You know, how do we live without this sort of thing? So because we're still in the nascent stages here, I don't have a lot of great examples. In fact, this is just something I doodled on Google Docs not too long ago. But, you know, the idea here, if we're using PerfSonar as an example, is to have some central controller with servers that are distributed around at the other locations, but operated by either the regional network or a large university in service to people who may be able to take advantage of these things. And we are working on service documents, and we're having discussions with a couple of providers at this point. Kimber, in particular, is most interested in this PerfSonar service. If anybody is interested in hearing more, just shoot me a mail and I'd be happy to loop you into discussions. We do anticipate trying to turn a couple of these pieces of technology into service offerings. PerfSonar will probably be the first. Science DMZ and data transfer will probably be second. And then third, we're exploring the idea of network capacity testing, typically by using hardware-based testers to prove out new circuits. This one has a little bit more policy level considerations that we need to think about, but that one will probably come out in the near term as well. We've been talking to people about security, but so far we haven't had anybody who's really clamoring for this one, so we'll probably push the security aspect a little bit further out into the grant. And then last but not least is our training. And I think that this is what most people probably remember if you attended or heard about the LAN workshops, and many of the regionals did sponsor these over the years. At the end of OIN, we had over 750 people go through during the 3-year operational period, and I want to say over 150 different organizations and a couple of different countries in most of the states. These were successful because it's technology. People like learning about technology. But we want to try to shift things up a little bit. You know, it's not just about, hey, here's some new technology that I can show you. We want people to start putting this into practice. We want people to understand that these tools do have a use case, and understanding what the analytics that they spit out and how they're able to sort of assist with the scientific workflow is an important next step. So we still do offer hands-on persona sessions. We still do the application deep dive with the scientists. We still deal with DMZs and DTNs, but the materials are not going to look precisely like OIN. They're going to be more tailored towards how do you use it versus how do you build it. A couple of regionals have already requested, and we'll have workshops this coming year. Kimber's will be next week. I believe GPNs will be at the end of May. LEARNs will be in June. ORNETs will be in May as well. If anybody is interested in hosting one of these events, just shoot us a line and we can talk. So I'm at the end of my prepared remarks. I think that if anybody needs a takeaway here, we are an NSF-funded center. We're not going to turn anybody away, even if you're not one of our direct partners, and we really want to hear from you. We want to be that single point of contact to help with these problems. We want to assist people as they're getting involved in trying to design new things. We want to help your researchers. So send us a note at that general email list there, and somebody can respond. And those are the names of the PIs if you want to email us directly. So I will open up the floor for questions if anybody has them.
So, Jason, this is Jen. Thank you first
for that
fantastic
presentation as always. You always do such a smooth job in presenting the information.
We've benefited
from the Quilt
community
and having you host a workshop for
a researcher
engaging
how to conduct
one of these.
Jen, you have an echo. At least I think I may not be the only one hearing it. But
let's see. Is that a little bit better?
Yeah, it's better now. Thanks.
Oh, thank you very much. There's a delay on my side, so it seems a little odd here. But I wanted to return back to Jason, your item on the perf sonar, infrastructure as a service. You mentioned that Kimber was on top of this for wanting to implement for this community. Do you have an idea of how this might roll out within a specific regional community?
Sure, I can give a little bit of info about sort of what our early planning has revolved around, and we're going to be starting this in earnest with Kimber probably after their regional meeting is done at the next week. We wanted to pause until we had a chance to get past that aspect of it. When we were talking about this, we sort of came to a couple of conclusions. The best way to deploy Personar is to try to use similar hardware everywhere that it needs to be testing. So first and foremost, we'd like to work with people to make sure that they have very similar, very homogeneous sort of hardware components that are available for this. And this is done for two reasons. Number one, it gives you a stable baseline. We want to measure network performance. We do not want to measure host performance. And second, it makes it a lot easier to manage if somebody wants to try to institute some form of configuration management of the systems. The other thing that we are going to codify into the service document, and I don't know what the answer is going to be for Kimber. In fact, it may be different for Kimber than it will be for other networks that are thinking about this as well, is who physically owns and runs those components. If they are living in somebody else's network, are they going to be okay with you managing a machine that lives in their network? Do you have to leave it on your side of the fence? If it does live on their side, do they get the ability to go in there and directly control it? So this is not really a technological problem. It's more of a social problem and a policy level decision. You know, how do you put this infrastructure in place to get the most benefit and still have it be secure, safe, and provide, you know, real information for the person? So what we're going to be doing with Kimber is rolling out the pilot with a single identified campus. In this case, it's a campus that already had a CC Star grant. And we're going to be asking them questions about, you know, do you want to have full control over this machine? Or would you rather Kimber run it for you? What do you really want to see out of it? Do you just want to get a daily report of how well it's doing versus the things that it's testing to? Do you want to only receive information when a real problem comes up? So on and so on. So we think that the answer will be different for everybody, but what we're going to be measuring during this process is how long it takes to build the infrastructure, how much time is needed to maintain the infrastructure, and how long it really can live on before it needs to be upgraded in terms of its hardware, software, or other components, because that's really what's going to go into the business model discussion. And at the end of this grant, we hope to have that answer so that we can push out a white paper or a prescriptive BCP to the Quilt community and say, you know, this is what happened when we tried to do this with Kimber. You know, it cost X, it requires this much human resource to do, it took this much time to get into place. And hopefully by doing that, we can see if this would scale to others, other people who want to take advantage of some form of performance measurement infrastructure at the small to medium campuses, and if they have the ability to sort of fund the initial capital investment, or if they're going to be passing the costs on down to the users.
Thanks, Jason. What's interesting in there is, can you hear me okay?
Yep, I can.
Okay, good. I think I fixed my echo issue. What's interesting in there in your description of this is those questions around the social aspects, right? The policies or practices. When you roll that out, you know, what are those key questions for an institution and a regional working together to answer of whose side of the fence is it going to be on, who does the upgrades, you know, some of those policy questions that an institution has to think through if they want to implement that. That's a really interesting aspect as too. I would imagine oftentimes with the smaller medium campuses, you know, just knowing enough to ask questions and have a discussion or conversation with some of the stakeholders at the institution incredibly valuable.
Yeah, it's a great observation, and that's what we're going for, because we're pretty sure that some people will say, I want this to be the Ronco of performance monitoring. I want to set it and forget it, and then others probably will want to have a little bit more control over what happens.
Excellent. Other questions or comments for Jason? You're also welcome to put them in the chat room window if you prefer.
So this is Pete Simpson. I have a question quickly. I think this presentation is a really good way to introduce the concept of EPOC to like scientists. I think scientists have too many places like other centers where they have to go to, and they have to read PDFs or they have to read white papers or something like that. It really helps to have somebody talking and explaining what goes on. So is this exact presentation, or I'm sure Jason you've given this before, available as a online video, not a slide deck, and not but a presentation just like this? If it was just captured once whenever you present it, I could go to one of my scientist people here on site and say, when I'm talking about a deep dive, what does that mean? Because that's specifically kind of what I'm interested about in it today.
So I think that this is the first time that I gave this online, and as long as the recording that we struggled with in the beginning was of good quality, I think that we can make that available. That's an excellent point, Pete. And I always take for granted that I give this in person a lot, and then the people in the audience are able to sort of see it. But we can certainly make sure that this gets posted in a location where people can just reference it, whether it be YouTube or something like that.
Okay, thanks.
And I apologize for our hiccup in the beginning on the recording, but we are happy to make the recording of this available so that you are able to review with your staff, with your institutions. So we'll be glad to share that link when our session's over today. This is again, and I have one more comment for you, Jason. I really appreciate your case studies that you presented as part of this. You know, what some of the issues were, the process to walk through and identify those and to fix them for the researcher. Speaking from a National Research Platform communication side, you know, finding those case studies and being able to communicate them so eloquently as you did in terms of what's the impact for a researcher. I really appreciate you including those as part of your presentation.
And I think a lot of people do appreciate those as well, because until you can really get your arms around what the science is, it's really a very far off and nebulous concept to really imagine. It wasn't until we did an event with Colorado State and NOAA a couple years ago that I really had a full understanding of how weather satellites work. You know, for example, I did not realize, and I guess I probably should have just thought about it a little bit more carefully, that satellites, when they go up in orbit, you know, are a time capsule of when they were originally designed, and often they're designed 10 or 15 years in the past. So a satellite that goes up in 2015 is sort of using 2005's technology, which basically means that, yeah, it's a downstep from what we would see if we were doing things on Earth today in terms of data transmission sizes and quantities and things like that. But it also does point to an important gap in support. If they designed all the ground station stuff using that technology as well, then there needs to be care taken to the speed mismatches and how these things are sort of handled. And the only way you get that is by talking to the scientists themselves. So we will continue to do those, and we will always continue to post the information online so that people can understand it.
Any final questions or comments for Jason? All right, well, we ended with the slide here with contact information that Jason presented. If you want to go deeper into aspects of the topics that Jason presented on today, please use those. Jason, thank you again very much for the presentation this morning.
Thanks all. Have a good weekend.
Thank you. You too.